Actually, I like. Actually, I like quite some stuff, but like all over this, all over the blah 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 blah. Blah. This one is actually quite interesting. It's called Bring Back Dark Fantasy, you cowards. Like, actually, I'm actually curious because Dark Fantasy became like a trend because
What
of
happened to the
dark fantasy became like quite trendy on TikTok because of like the dark fantasy YouTube thing. Where is it? I'll if you heard the song, you know what I'm talking about. Uh, like because like dark fantasy become like quite fucking trendy because of one fucking song, and this fucking song is quite fucking legit. Let's listen to that. Bro, if you watch TikToks, bro, like I just remembered you of a trend that you forgot that you forgot existed. So yeah, like dark fantasy is kind of nice, mega nice actually. Like especially like the fucking AI stuff. It's a shame that like there isn't more on YouTube, but like I'll try to fucking pick some that are really like crazy fucking cool looking, and I'll try to fucking react to that and share it to you.
fantasy genre? If you're active on social media, then chances
Okay, I'm actually not listening. I'm actually saving more stuff. Yeah, okay.
are you've come to. What happened to the fantasy genre? If you're active on social media, then chances are you've come across a certain type
So this is exactly the TikToks. Basically, you heard the song, you forgot the song. Basically, it's always the same song, and to fucking do stuff like this using AI is absolutely
of
unbelievable.
AI generated video with soft lighting, mystical settings, eerie music, unnaturally beautiful people, and an overall vibe that feels like it came straight out of a dream.
And fucking Shrek, bro. Fucking Shrek, bro.
Or maybe a nightmare? These videos, which are often referred to as dark fantasy, aren't just another TikTok trend. They point to this growing sentiment that Hollywood doesn't seem to have picked up on yet, that audiences are desperate for real movie magic. Historically, during periods of hardship, movie theaters have served as a much needed escape. I mean, they practically got us through the Great Depression. And I'd argue that now more than ever, people need stories that can help them forget their troubles and woes.
Yeah. I agree with that. Can you fucking stop making movies about the world being destroyed every time? I'm talking to you, Century Fox and Universal. Fuck you. Like, can you do like movies where it's like where the fate of the world is not about like the fucking change or something like that? Thank you. That was like from the committee of from the group of people that actually are scared of this fucking thing happening, knowing that some people can make it happen because they're stupid, and actually quite relate to the fact that like yeah, it's kind of depressing overall, to be honest. So yeah, if you can do less fucking world shattering world like world whatever the fuck is about to be destroyed movies, I will be thankful. Like just because, oh my fucking god, all depressing and how overdone can this trope can be. Let me just like watch like rewatch like some fucking dark fantasy where like the worst thing that can happen is that the knight can die, or the hero can die, or the princess is just like never found, and that's it. And not the fucking like the whole, we went from like the, oh yeah, so the world is in peril. No, it's the galaxy. No, it's the reality. No, it's fuck you. It's like all dimensions at the same time, and and also also in the past, the past timelines. And it's like, bro, like at this point, it's like you try to fucking you try to fucking prove something that like I don't fucking know what it is, but like it became like really quite the fucking like lame fucking story, especially with like when you get a second movie, it's even worse. You thought that the fate of world wasn't enough of a stake, wasn't enough of a fucking like a problem for the heroes to solve. Now it's not one world, it's three worlds, and actually there's this fucked up guy, and this fucked up guy he actually like destroyed something important, so the hero shut the fuck up, make a movie about like I don't fucking know, being nice to dogs and like doing ecology for fuck's sake.
Like every aspect of pop culture, the film industry is deeply influenced by the world around us, with different genres rising and falling in popularity depending on the social and political climate. And fantasy
Or dark fantasy. Do dark fantasy. Thank you.
is no exception. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the evolution of fantasy in film, including the genre's most notable examples, the historical circumstances that influenced its direction, key characteristics that made it unique, and the way that audiences' enduring love for magic, myths, and make-believe have kept it alive. Let's get into it. Hollywood has been dipping its toes in the fantasy realm since the inception of film, but because of the technological limitations of the era, it was never able to surpass action-adventure stories or romantic comedies in terms of popularity. In the 1930s, movies featuring monstrous characters like Dracula, King Kong, and Frankenstein were all the rage, signifying a greater acceptance and interest in these sorts of fictional stories.
And this was actually quite revolutionary. So remember King Kong actually, or like Godzilla? They're not like canned-sized monsters. And basically, they needed to create a new technology using basically figurines and a certain perspective lens that will actually like they will put like Godzilla next to the fucking like real city, the figurine of Godzilla, and move it realistically for it to be the size of the city in these movies. It goes as like some cities in Lord of the Rings actually do not exist. Can you believe that like the cities from Lord of the Rings do not exist? Yeah, no, right. Fucking like tragic. I'm sorry to tell you, to share you the news. Like, I know that like no one knows, but like basically some of the cities like in Lord of the Rings, they were like based like not 3D rendered, but based on maquettes. Maquettes like basically like they were like small. They were like how the fuck is let me just check the word uh mm, so yeah, they were just like models, mock-ups. There were mock-ups, but like small size mock-ups of whatever the fuck of the city or like the monster that were like that you basically like so check this camera. So that's what they will do basically like this with the so you see like this was the mock-up, right? But they will do basically this with the camera. And it's like, oh, look at this fucking can. Actually, the can was so fucking big. Ah, no, not the can. You know, basically, that was like, this is how the cinema actually used to fucking function. It's stupid. It sounds like silly, you know, but like, this is actually, and it was well done. It was like a category of like artistry when it comes to cinema back in the day. And even now, when it comes to certain, like, creating certain, like, landscapes such as cities or like just like impossible cities or impossible like mostly cities, I'm guessing these days.
But because of the Great Depression, which ushered in an era of uncertainty, lighthearted fantasy remained a rare sight until the end of the decade. Two of the earliest examples were 1937's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and 1939's The Wizard of Oz, which wound up becoming some of the most popular and influential films of all time. But considering their incredibly high production values, studios weren't fully sold on the idea of fantasy. The 1940s started off with a bang with The Thief of Baghdad and Fantasia, and with their breathtaking visuals and surreal artistry, these fantasy films helped create a lasting association between magic and color. Although there was clearly demand for these sorts of fantasy films, World War II put a screeching halt to the development of the genre, with the color process being deemed too costly and the subject matter inappropriate considering the political climate. This eventually led to the rise of the black and white film noir genre instead, which
Yeah, it's pretty fucking legitimate during the Second World War to maybe not fucking like talk about like fairy tales when everyone's fucking scared of the end of the world, you know? Like actually the world being like shaked. But it's interesting. I didn't know that like the noir genre actually came from the Second World War era. I actually love the noir genre. Noir genre basically is a really serious type, like really mundane, so day-to-day slice of life if you watch anime, so really like realistic type of movies and TV shows that were like based on reality without like any fantastic part to it, to be honest. Like there wasn't like anything fantastical magical in it. It was basically just like it was basically just like your rom-coms and stuff, but darker. It was a noir, the noir type of feel. Movies were like more like fatalist, like sad, like and they were like using like basically like interesting themselves in subjects of society and basically or philosophy or like whatever fuck you call a subject, right? And we're like actually like serious and in a really reserved, not reserved, but kind of like really kind of shy way, you know, like not in this in your face trying to fucking sell you stuff because it's a dark story. No, no, really in the shy, reserved, kind of timid way, you know? And this made this type of art really like unbelievable, and you can even see that like some art the film noir actually what was it called, Bioshock actually takes a lot from that, for example, and the vintage, the steampunk actually takes from the film noir, you know.
Appealed to the cynical mindset that had emerged because of the war. After the war ended, fantasy films were pushed into production as a celebration that the worst was over, and throughout the 1950s and 60s, Hollywood released an assortment of movies inspired by ancient myths, folk tales, legends, and fairy tales like Sinbad the Sailor, The Tales of Hoffmann, Darby O'Gill and the Little People, Arabian Nights, Hercules, Babes in Toyland, The Glass Slipper, The Wonderful World of the Brothers Grimm, and Sleeping Beauty. Legendary child actress Shirley Temple even hosted a popular TV series focused on different fairy tales, proving that the American public's fondness for these sorts of stories wasn't a fluke. In the aftermath of World War II, the United States and the USSR began to battle over their respective ideologies, resulting in the Cold War. This divided the two superpowers' allies into separate camps, the Western Bloc and the Eastern Bloc, with the countries in the latter being restricted by censors and communist guidelines. There was a big emphasis to resist American ideologies and remain true to their own traditions, and with foreign films often being banned entirely, there was a resurgence in classic folktales and legends. These fantasy films would often have an undercurrent of communist messaging, with the storylines featuring a greedy and egotistical villain who makes the lives of others miserable, only to be defeated by a selfless hero who has an endless love and respect for their homeland and family.
Yeah, basically it was like a capitalist bad guy each time. Like there was a lot of that. But back in the day, it was so that people were not like fucking like super prodigies with like basically a fucking master degree and fuck you and I know it from YouTube or I know it from the internet type of like logic. People used to be like really innocent when it comes to knowledge, and we tend to forget as like historians as well, people tend to forget how people were just like more innocent, you know, back in the day. And it doesn't mean that they were stupid. It just means that like they were like more innocent and they didn't knew as much. And because of that, like this type of like movies where you're like, it's actually fucking stupid watching that. Well, it wasn't stupid for these people because it didn't add um this like never ending stream of like information that they can access from like a smartphone, basically. Makes a world of difference.
This included the likes of The Princess with the Golden Star, The Tale of Sar Sultan, There Was Once a King, Snow White and Rose Red, Kingdom in the Clouds, and Jack Frost. Fantasy films in both the Eastern and Western Bloc had similar visuals at this time, with colorful scenery, elaborate sets, fun costuming, angelic-looking protagonists, and entertaining musical numbers, which created an overall magical look. These films also featured many staples of the fantasy genre, including knights in shining armor, wicked stepmothers, foolish kings, animal transformations, beautiful but mistreated maidens, and a morally ambiguous magical entity who would set the story in motion. For most of the 1940s, well into the 1960s, the Motion Picture Production Code, aka the Hays Code, had dictated what sorts of films were allowed to be made in Hollywood, with everything from the story to the actors to the visuals having to follow these guidelines. This is what led to the popularity of the rom-com and musical during that time period, as they were one of the few genres guaranteed to make it through the censor every single time. With the Hays Code finally being abolished in the 1970s, filmmakers were allowed to take greater risks, and in contrast to the glitz and glamour of prior decades, films went in a gritty and pessimistic direction influenced by the Vietnam War. The sort of theatricality that had defined old Hollywood, like musical numbers and technicolor and transatlantic accents, were seen as old-fashioned, and as a result the fantasy genre fell by the wayside in favor of family dramas, crime thrillers, and gory horror. In Europe, however, fantasy films continued to thrive, in large part because the political turmoil of the 1970s had resulted in people yearning for a simpler time. Many filmmakers began turning to the fairy tales that had brought them joy in their youth, like Donkey Skin, Beauty and the Beast, Three Wishes for Cinderella, and The Adventures of Pinocchio, which took visual cues from earlier decades. With many countries in the Eastern Bloc attempting uprisings, but failing, these fantasy films featured less communist propaganda than they had in earlier years, highlighting their discontent with Soviet control and their hope to someday have a happily ever after. The Conan the Barbarian comic series had grown in popularity over the course of the 1970s, and by the 1980s, several knockoffs had spawned, including The First Kingdom, Dagar the Invincible, Beowulf Dragonslayer, Warlord.
So when it comes to Conan the Barbarian, like I never understood how the fuck. So I understand that the stories can be interesting. Never understood how the fuck, like with this choice of art style and like just the way it looks, the characters and the style, the character, their clothing and setting is fine. Never understood how the fuck this became popular, like in any way. Boy, that's just me. Like, I guess some people are into like really like muscle dudes that can fuck up people. Yeah, I'm quite the thin guy that like really is not like the fucking like audience for that. Well, never understood how it became like this big.
And Claw the Unconquered. Dungeons & Dragons had also developed a sizable audience, and combined with the enduring popularity of The Lord of the Rings, the public's interest in fantasy inspired Hollywood to give the genre another shot. With the 1980s being all about excess, leading to an increased extravagance in every aspect of pop culture, films of the time period became more of a spectacle, featuring larger set pieces, bigger stars, and a lot more action. Some of the first fantasy
And then it became, and then the strand never kind of changed, and it just kept on getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Like now you get, but it allowed now to actually like for us to have like this variety when it comes to cinema that like was not present back in the day. 10 years of cinema, like basically you have like your trend of cinema and you only eat the same type of genre of cinema, and there wasn't like a lot of leeways if it when it comes to cinema. Now we get that thanks to actually like the big productions that actually like opened a lot of gates by basically going bigger, going higher.
films to be released during this era were Hawk the Slayer in 1980 and Dragon Slayer, The Archer, Excalibur, and Clash of the Titans in 1981. Seeing varying degrees of critical and commercial success, these movies had some crucial overlap that would come to define fantasy of the decade. In 1982, The Sword and the Sorcerer and Conan the Barbarian were released, and with both thriving at the box office, Hollywood went all in.
Yeah, some of Conan the Barbarian. Never understood why the will fuck like that. But it's just because it's so not my aesthetic. It's literally like I really dislike everything about it. Like the way it looks, it must be good, but it's just like I always watched this and I was like, how the fuck did you even sold one DVD of
On
that?
fantasy. The sword and sorcery subgenre became especially popular at this time, although I'd make the argument that if you'd seen one, you'd seen them all. These films would usually follow a morally gray warrior whose physical strength was their only weapon. Accompanied by a small group of allies, they would set off on an adventure to seek vengeance on some magic-wielding villain. In most cases, the protagonist would be an incredibly macho man, while the female characters were nothing but scantily clad set dressing. While there were some visual similarities to fantasy films of the past, I always found it interesting how the sword and sorcery genre was clearly influenced by the 1980s rock and wrestling craze, with the characters looking like medieval versions of WWE performers, complete with oiled-up biceps, shiny spandex, and over-choreographed battle sequences. Notable examples of the trend included the Beastmaster, Red Sonja, Masters of the Universe, Conquest, Hercules, Heavy Metal, Deathstalker, the Warrior and the Sorceress, and Ator the Fighting Eagle, which is honestly just the tip of the iceberg. While the genre initially saw a lot of interest, it quickly developed a less than positive reputation because of its hammy acting, formulaic storylines, and seemingly low budget, and by the end of the decade it had fizzled out entirely. In contrast were more traditional fantasy films like The Never-Ending Story, Legend, The Princess Bride, Labyrinth, Willow, Sword of the Valiant, The Dark Crystal, and Ladyhawke. Common plot points included damsels in distress, mythical creatures, dashing heroes, nervous adolescents,
And really bad rendered dragons.
grand quests, and battles between good and evil. While these films incorporated bright colors, stunning backdrops, and a good deal of sparkles, they also mixed in some slightly darker imagery, like muddy swamps, oversized rats, and absolutely terrifying villains. While the settings were as fantastical as the storylines, they'd usually be rooted in some vaguely historical context, like the Stone Age, ancient Greece, or the medieval era, time periods that had fascinated the public for centuries. They also had a habit of combining practical effects with experimental visual effects, creating an aesthetic that was artificial and uncanny, but also beautiful and mesmerizing. The darker direction fantasy took in the 1980s was even present in animation, with films like The Black Cauldron, The Secret of NIMH, The Last Unicorn, Happily Ever After, and The Flight of Dragons. But unfortunately, many of them didn't perform very well at the box office, something I blame.
Is this anime? Is this anime? God damn. It's not anime, but really looking like anime.
On the growing idea that animation was just for kids, which is why many of the animated fantasy films of the 1990s, like Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, Hercules, The Page Master, The Swan Princess, and Thumbelina, were a lot more lighthearted. For most of the fantasy genre's history, filmmakers had gone in a more theatrical direction to tie into the absurdity of the premise, but with technological advancements of the 1990s allowing for cameras to move off sound stages and into real locations, natural visuals replaced the stylized look the genre had become known for. This meant no more loincloths, shining swords, or glowing crystal balls. While Gothic horror was thriving in the 1990s, bringing vampires and witches into the mainstream, dragons.
Yeah, so Gothic horror was thriving during the 1990s. Yeah, because there was a goth during the 1990s, kinda. The Gothic horror, it wasn't a cinema genre. It was just me walking around in the street scaring people because I was kind of like in the middle of like scare, in the right in the right fucking like balance between scary and ugly.
Warlocks, and fairies weren't as popular, with Dragonheart, A Tale of Terror, and A Midsummer's Night's Dream being some of the few fantasy movies from the decade that actually looked magical. The kids' space was the exception, with films like Hook, A Simple Wish, Magic in the Mirror, Fairy Tale, The Adventures of Pinocchio, Cinderella, Magic Island, and Leap and Leprechauns continuing to have the bright colors and playful imagery that made the genre so appealing to begin with. You'll notice that unlike fantasy films of the past, which would typically focus on adult characters, these films had child protagonists, which might have inadvertently solidified the idea that fantasy stories were more juvenile. Now, there was one thing that was a vast improvement from the 1980s. With third-wave feminism challenging traditional gender roles, female characters were no longer relegated to being the sexy sidekick, but could actually be a major protagonist or antagonist.
Oh yeah, if can you believe that like women were so fucking was so fucking like so fucking oh fucking discriminated against. It took like 70 to 80 years to be like, yeah, maybe the girl, she can actually like fucking do cool stuff. Oh my fucking god, I hate sexes so much.
Just think about Matilda, Merlin, Anastasia, or Xena Warrior Princess, with the latter being a far cry from the sword and sorcery sex kittens that inspired her. What was great about this more feminist direction was that they didn't totally throw the male characters under the bus. It was about giving all of the characters strengths and weaknesses. In the 2000s, the fantasy genre exploded, something credited to the success of the Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings film series. Family-friendly fantasy was a big thing at the time and brought in billions of dollars, and studios made sure there was enough action for dad, romance for mom, and magic for the kids. With the Scholastic Book Fair turning a generation of children into voracious readers, Hollywood made a point of adapting popular fantasy books into films, including the Spiderwick Chronicles, Inkheart, Arthur and the Invisibles, The Chronicles of Narnia, Aragon, The Golden Compass, Nanny McPhee, Peter Pan, and Ella Enchanted. Of course, some of these adaptations fared better than others. Some darker fantasy stories intended for older audiences included The Brothers Grimm, The Fall, The Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, Stardust, and Pan's Labyrinth, which were loosely inspired by a variety of classic legends and folklore. You can really tell that Hollywood had more money than they knew what to do with. So while CGI became a lot more prominent than it had in other eras, they still had fun with prosthetics, practical effects, and sound stages. While I don't think there's a lot of visual overlap with fantasy films of the 1980s or 19...
So this is what I look like mostly like when I wake up. Because like this is what cigarettes do to people. Do not smoke.
50s, the
Okay?
2000s were still able to overlap with
If you
fantasy
smoke,
films of the...
this is what you will look like if you keep smoking. All right? So 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 quit smoking while it's not too late.
1980s or 1950s, the 2000s were still able to capture the magic and whimsy that makes the genre so inviting. Because of the popularity of the superhero genre, action-adventure became an inescapable addition to fantasy in the 2010s, with films like Alice in Wonderland, Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters, Maleficent, Pan, The Nutcracker in the Four Realms, and Jack the Giant Slayer putting a larger emphasis on fighting the bad guy than their original fairy tale. Not to mention that with the popularity of the YA genre, especially The Hunger Games and Twilight, a lot of tropes popular in that space began finding their way into fantasy. Films like Red Riding Hood...
Yeah, and what she's describing right now is basically like the globalization and the free like the new wave of freedom of Hollywood. Because like right now she's basically saying and this and this and this became kind of like this and this and this. People actually fucking grew up like says this stupid sexism that like women were suffering from, girls were suffering from when it comes to cinema, which is like really like sexism in cinema when it comes to like the how badly it was like the girl doesn't get to do the cool stuff, it's only the dude. This is a summary of let's the struggle that women that women suffered from in the art industry for like fucking 70 years. Can you fucking believe that? It's the cool stuff you do princess stuff. Oh my fucking god. I don't want to like I'm not like someone violent, but like if I but sometimes like I'm happy to fucking know that like some sexist got beaten the fuck out.
Snow White and the Huntsman, Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Mortal Instruments, and Beautiful Creatures epitomized this subgenre and included love triangles, family secrets, chosen one narratives, and adolescent subgenre.
Wait, is this the girl from
It
Twilight?
included love triangles, family...
Wait, is this Bella? Bella? Bella, what the fuck? What the fuck is this Bella? Wait, what the fuck are you not? Why are you not with Eddard? What the fuck happened? Why do you have an armor? What the fuck?
Secrets, chosen one narratives, and adolescent angst. Now, did I eat it up every single time? Absolutely. But in hindsight, it was pretty obvious that Hollywood was just cashing in on a craze. With CGI fully eclipsing practical effects by this point, a lot of these movies wound up looking overproduced, with a glossy sheen that almost veered into uncanny valley territory. I truly think there's no better example of how...
So the uncanny valley is like when you create an AI or create like a human looking like humanoid looking person, but they're not like they're kind of too realistic, and because of that it looked creepy as fuck. like just because they look too close to the fucking thing they try to copy.
How much the visuals in fantasy had deteriorated than by comparing the 1981 Clash of the Titans film to its 2010 remake, or 2013's Oz the Great and Powerful.
If you want a good fucking scare, just search Uncanny Valley on Google. It's not that terrifying, but it's really like fucking like weird looking. Like you'll remember what the fuck is this if you check it out.
Compared to 1939's Wizard of Oz. You can just tell that everyone is walking around in front of a green screen and interacting with things that aren't actually there. Fourth wave feminism had a huge impact on female characters in the 2010s and 2020s, with there being a bigger focus on women's empowerment and independence than in previous decades. In theory, I have no complaints, but unfortunately in practice, it often came across as performative. Instead of creating interesting characters with nuanced motivations and realistic growth, something they'd done pretty well in the 1990s, the fantasy genre was soon overrun by dozens of generic girl bosses. Just look at the main characters in Cursed, The Princess, and Damsel, who not only have eerily similar personalities, but even look the same. To make matters worse, the vast majority of fantasy films that have been released in recent years have just been live-action remakes of far superior animated movies, and I don't know why these companies are continuing to churn them out when they've been such massive critical and commercial disappointments.
Yeah, and basically, like the reality of it is that like the sexism present and racism as well. It was like it was the same logic. White men get to do cool stuff, people of color, not women, because white men better. And but the thing is that, like there was like some like calibration, reevaluation to this like type of art when it comes to actually like when well actually the white man lost once again because the white man is fucking cringe, because like people didn't knew exactly how to play with these new like storytelling instruments that they were given, and because of that you had like a lot of like trial and error that was done. So I understand why she is jaded and like disappointed with this type of art, but basically that was like a period of trying new genres and new story tropes, so stories basically, that were not accessible before because white people suck and the white man should be burned.
Sure, in the grand scheme of things, movies might not seem like a huge deal, not when we're facing trade wars, global warming, and a long list of other crises. But as we've seen time and time again, fantasy has always been more than just entertainment. It's a way for us to imagine a better, brighter future, one that might even have a little bit of magic in it. That's exactly why I think people are so drawn to these AI-generated dark fantasy videos.
And so basically the problem was that like people tried out the fucking like new options that were given when it comes to story writing and storytelling, but the problem was that like since it was really new, they didn't got into like this idea of creating deep characters, complex characters. Nowadays it's not the problem anymore, and you can see that like they're all like a lot of like wonderful stories. I'll give you Wonder Woman when it comes to like Wonder Woman, or like actually well actually Twilight, right? Like people like to despise on Twilight still did the sales, and Bella is a complicated character that people like to troll. Twilight is not my favorite like fucking like movie at all, and not even close to being like something that I like, right? But it shows that like nowadays like this girl boss and like stuff, it doesn't exist anymore because this kind of like new wave and new options, it's already in the past, and people got the time to experiment this type of new cinema that they were finally allowed to do.
Visually, they rely heavily on the fantasy aesthetics of the 1950s and 1980s.
And also not only allowed to do but also got the resources to do, because cinema actually became really cheaper to produce, like
hence all the romantic lighting, strange creatures, and dreamlike landscapes. But there's also a darker, more sinister undertone that feels perfectly aligned with the relatively bleak reality that we're living through. Considering how popular these videos are, it's clear that there's still an appetite for fantasy stories, which begs the question, why isn't Hollywood making movies like this anymore? What happened to creativity? Instead of continuing the wave of glossy, CGI-heavy, desaturated blockbusters, I'd love to see a return to something a little more theatrical and magical. And don't tell me that it's not possible. The Love Witch came out in 2016, and it could fool anyone into thinking it was made in the 1960s.
Yeah, I would agree with her point of view and add like more also metaphorical, like just like more like the a symbolical type of like art that needs to come back. It's just that like it doesn't get released like quite enough. But on this, if you really if you really miss this type of art, this type of like cinema. Well, try to give a go, try to give a try to anime. In anime you can find this and it's good quality.
There are hundreds of legends from all over the world that haven't been adapted to film yet. Why not try some of them out? And I know that Disney acts like they have dibs on all fairy tales, but considering they've been refusing to put a modicum of effort into it, I'd rather someone else give it a try. In the meantime, I'm gonna keep wishing for the return of movie magic, cause Lord knows we could all use a little more of it. I hope you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.
This was a great video talking about like great, well, actually like a great story and let me just check what's her content like. If not for that, uh this is interesting. Okay, so she talks about like other movies and yeah. This was actually fucking like, I'm really happy that my algorithm like got to fucking show me this video, because what the fuck, this is actually quite a fucking like a good essay. It talks about like a lot of things. It talks about history and it talks about like the changes made and I will agree with what she said with the name of the video. Bring back dark fantasy, you cowards! Bring it back! Why the hell not? Why the hell not? Bring it back, you fucking cowards! Anyway.